Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, also joins in live and exclusive right here on ET Now. Montek, thank you so much for joining us on ET Now. What's your sense? Do you think the budget has enough in it to put the growth story back on track? Are we on track to a 6.5% growth in FY14 because the macro headwinds are still very much there?
Well, I think the finance minister has clearly zeroed in on the key issues. There is macroeconomic stress, everybody's been talking about it, and I think he's managed to, first of all, do better than people thought in the current year, because instead of a fiscal deficit of 5.3%, we're ending the current year at 5.2, which is clearly good, and he's held to the promise of 4.8. He's done that by, I think, a fairly responsible approach to expenditure. There's a lot of stability on taxation, which is very, very important. Some additional measures which I think are quite reasonable. And the central message that the budget speech gave is that we must now gear up to get the growth rate back. Those are not things that are the result of specific tax measures. It's more like a statement of policy that he's really committing the government to doing everything necessary to get the growth rate back up. They've indicated a range for the next year, less than 7%, but at the upper end, 6.7 would be, in my view, pretty good. So I think on the whole, the budget deals with the critical issues of the macro imbalance, provides a corrective on fiscal deficits, which everyone wanted, emphasizes the importance of infrastructure and the need to step up investment in many areas. And then I think it holds out a lot of other possible initiatives which over time could have very positive effects on the economy.
Right. Montek, if I could come in at this point, there is a proposal for a 29% increase in planned spending in the coming year, but this is after a lot of slashing this year. Is it really feasible for 29% increase in planned spending at a time when most people say, I can't get forest clearance, I cannot get that particular clearance, there is no coal available? In other words, are there a sufficient number of glitches outside the budget to actually be fixed before we can have this kind of increase in planned spending? And secondly, to facilitate some of the private sector thing, do you think the time is now ripe for a significant cut in interest rates to further stimulate private spending, even if government isn't able to get its investment rate up by 29%?
Well, you know, as far as the increase in planned spending is concerned, you're right. Compared with the expenditure that ministries were actually able to do in the current year, the increase provided is very substantial. I'm reasonably certain that this will be achieved. I mean, for the simple reason that what the finance minister has actually emphasized in his bilateral discussions, and we've been also emphasizing, you know, the reason ministries don't manage to spend is not because they're not getting forest clearances and so on. A lot of planned expenditure has nothing to do with forest clearance. It's just that they don't get their act together. Details of schemes are not finalized until after the budget is passed. Whereas, for example, a ministry could, as of now, given that the numbers are known, should be gearing itself up to get all the necessary internal government expenditure approvals so that they can build up a head of steam during the year. And I think they'll be able to do that. On the second issue, as far as, you know, the interest rates and so on is concerned, look, the most important thing to bring the interest rate down is to reduce the fiscal deficit. Because if you have a very high deficit, it's obviously absorbing all the resources that are in the system. Reduce the deficit, which I think is done, and secondly, to bring inflation down. Now, the news on that is reasonably good. I wish inflation were even lower, but it's clearly been trending down. So I think those two things together, if people see that the fiscal deficit is under control, we will be able to move to a somewhat lower interest rate environment. It's not the case that the interest rate can be brought down simply by an administrative act. I mean, the administrative act really relates to the short-term interest rate, virtually the overnight interest rate, which the RBI fixes, or the very short-term rate. But the fact is that if you want a reduction in the long-term rate, which is really what is necessary for investment, You need to bring down the expectations of inflation. You need more money available with the banks. You need to encourage various types of financial instruments that will finance critical investment, especially in infrastructure. And there I think the finance minister has done quite a lot. I mean, all the sort of steps that have already been taken in terms of infrastructure debt funds, some of the improvements in the tax treatment relating to these instruments, I think they will cumulatively help to make more resources available. And also, of course, you know, we have to deal with things outside the budget. I mean, for example, in the big infrastructure projects, there are problems of fuel supply, availability of coal, availability of gas. Those are not things that are handled in the budget. But the government has put in place a mechanism where basically interministerial differences can be resolved at a cabinet level. I know a lot of work is going on in order to move in that direction, and I feel that in the course of the next month or so, you'll see some actual action. Now, if all that happens, then I think we will be putting in place everything that's necessary to bring growth back again in the year 2013-14.